Alamin natin kung paano nagsimula ang buhay ng Acadians dito sa North America. Kaya guys, pasok tayo sa museum at panoorin natin ang palabas tungkol sa mga Acadians.
Montpellier.
Colette au point.
Donanderas.
Francis Blanchard. Michel Pinot.
Éloi Arsenon.
For close to 3 centuries, Prince Edward Island has been home to these well-known Acadian names. Today, 1/4 of the island's population lays claim to Acadian descent. Many island Acadians, like their ancestors before them, still make their living from the land and the sea. However, today their economy is more diversified, with tourism playing an ever-increasing role. Credit unions and cooperatives are an essential part of the fabric of their communities. The Acadians of Prince Edward Island are part of a larger family, with the most well-known members rooted in New Brunswick and Louisiana. An estimated 3 million Acadian descendants are scattered around the world.
Acadia, or the island.
Huh?
The island's Acadia.
The islands, yeah.
Who are the Acadians?
Are you an Acadian?
The
No.
Acadians trace their history from 1604.
Why?
When the first French colonists settled in North America.
Listen to it.
Most of these pioneers chose to settle on the shores of the Bay of Fundy, in a colony named Acadie, and with time developed quite prosperous agricultural communities such as Port-Royal, Grand-Pré, and Beaubassin. Life in Acadie, however, proved to be anything but secure. The Acadians lived in a climate of constant political uncertainty as their lands changed hands between France and England no less than 7 times. In 1713, with the signing of the Treaty of Utrecht, Acadie, as well as Newfoundland, reverted once and for all to a British colony and was renamed Nova Scotia. To bolster its presence in North America, France hastened to develop Ile Royale and Ile Saint-Jean, today's Cape Breton Island and Prince Edward Island. The French authorities encouraged the Acadians to leave Nova Scotia and resettle under the French flag, and in 1720 the first Acadian settlers arrived on Ile Saint-Jean. That same year, the Compagnie de l'Île Saint-Jean brought in 200 settlers directly from France. This French company had procured a land grant to establish inhabitants on the island and develop the cod fishing industry. Although they were the first European settlers, the French did not land on a deserted island. On the contrary, it had been inhabited by the Micmac people for centuries. Michel Achet, also known as Galon, his wife Anne Cormier, and their large brood of children were among the first Acadians to settle on the island. The Achet-Galon family thus became one of the principal founding families of Port-Joie, the colony's administrative and military center. Other Acadian families that left Nova Scotia for the island were duly recorded in the census of 1728. Arsenault, Blanchard, Buat, Martin, Chanson, Boudreaux, Bourque. The Acadians were primarily farmers settling at Port-Joie, Rivière du Nord-Est, Tracadie, Havre-au-Sauvage, and Montpec, while the colonists from France settled Havre-Saint-Pierre, Havre-au-Sauvage, and Pointe de l'Est, wherever they could most easily fish for cod. By 1748, 28 years after its settlement, Ile Saint-Jean only had 735 settlers, but over the next 4 years, this situation would change dramatically.
Must have been a lot of inbreeding.
700.
With the British increasing their presence in Nova Scotia, establishing Halifax in 1749, many Acadian families left to take refuge on Ile Saint-Jean. This exodus caused the colony's population to triple in less than 4 years.
Tripled.
However, life on the island proved challenging. In 1752, census taker Joseph de la Roque discovered a population on the edge of despair. In Malpeque, he reported that during the last 3 years, mice, then grasshoppers, and finally drought had in turn destroyed the wheat harvest. Bread was very scarce, and the inhabitants depended on shellfish gathered along the shores for survival. Matters grew steadily worse as another wave of immigration swept over the island in 1755. People were fleeing their land in Nova Scotia, where the British had started the expulsion of the Acadians, destroying their homes and farms and deporting them to the 13 colonies, today's eastern United States. However, for those that escaped the British, the island as a safe haven proved to be an illusion. 3 years later, in 1758, with the fall of the French fortress of Louisbourg on Ile Royale, the colony of Ile Saint-Jean also fell into British hands. 500 British soldiers were then dispatched to the island with orders to evacuate all settlers and repatriate them to France. Of some 2,000 Acadians deported, 2/3 perished. It is estimated that 720 souls drowned in the sinking of the Duke William and the Violet, while hundreds more succumbed to various epidemics that flared up on the other ships. In France, social and economic problems forced most of the Acadians to eventually leave, some returning to Canada, most moving on to Louisiana. During the expulsion of 1758, not all island Acadians were captured and deported by the British. Approximately 2,000 of them managed to evade the soldiers, escaping to the Bay of Chaleur in Quebec, while a few families remained hidden on the island. The Treaty of Paris in 1763 brought an end to war between France and Britain. The British authorities then allowed the Acadians to return to the maritime region as long as they settled in small groups. Gradually, Acadian families returned to the island from the Bay of Chaleur, the Magdalen Islands, southeastern New Brunswick, the islands of Saint-Pierre and Miquelon, and even from France. But they returned to face a major problem with land ownership. After the expulsion, the island had been distributed in large lots to British subjects, leaving returning Acadians no choice but to rent land from these new owners, many of whom were absentee landlords. By 1798, Acadian families on the island numbered 116, clustered together in 3 clan-like communities: Malpeque, Rustico, and Bay Fortune. Between 1799 and 1816, often unable to pay their rent and sometimes as victims of dishonesty, the Acadians abandoned their land in an attempt to improve their situation and moved elsewhere to start afresh. They left Malpeque and founded Tignish, Cascampac, Egmont Bay, Mont Carmel, and Miscouche. They deserted Bay Fortune, some to found Rollo Bay, some to settle in Cape Breton. And although the community in Rustico survived, it too eventually lost many of its families over the land question. For 100 years following the deportation, the island Acadians kept to themselves, memories of the expulsion, always fresh in their minds, impelled them to hold their British neighbors at a distance, and by doing so, kept intact their language, their culture, and their customs.
C'était pour cueillir du raisin, j'ai mis des cordes dans mon violon, j'ai mis des cordes. C'était pour cueillir du raisin, c'était pour cueillir du raisin. Le roncier vient sur ma main, j'ai mis des cordes dans mon violon, j'ai mis des cordes.
Un jour viendra, tu vous récompenseras. Alléluia, Alléluia.
Towards the middle of the 19th century, a small Acadian ruling class emerged. With the help of the clergy, these leaders made it their mission to raise the Acadians to the same social, economic, and political status as the island's British population. To do so, they chose to break through their community's cultural isolation, highlighted by the election of Stanislas Poirier, the first Acadian to be elected to the island's legislature in 1854. From the 1860s on, an important renewal occurred. For instance, convent schools were established by the Sisters of the Notre Dame congregation. The Farmers' Bank of Rustico was founded, and the economy was diversifying. On the island and throughout the Maritimes, many Acadians felt they were entering a new era, more progressive, and that English should be learned in order to better integrate into the dominant society. However, the enthusiasm engendered by this Renaissance posed a serious threat to the French language and Acadian identity, and became even more of a problem when governments gradually imposed English as the principal language in Acadian schools. Acadian leaders responded to these changes by organizing large conventions to discuss ways in which the identity of the Acadian people in the maritime provinces might be preserved and promoted. At the first convention held at Memoricook, New Brunswick in 1881, the participants chose the Feast of the Assumption, celebrated on August 15th as the Acadian National Feast Day. Held in Mascouche, Prince Edward Island in 1884, witnessed the adoption of an Acadian flag, the starred tricolour. And on that same occasion, the adoption of the melody from the Latin hymn Ave Maria Stella for the national Acadian anthem. On Prince Edward Island, Acadians took measures to keep their language and culture alive. In 1893, the Buat family founded a French-language newspaper, L'Impartial, in Tignish, and that same year saw the birth of the island's Acadian Teachers Association to promote the teaching of French in the province's public schools located in Acadian communities. Founded in 1919, spearheaded by Father Pierre-Paul Arsenault, the Société Saint-Thomas d'Aquin set its first goal to raise funds for higher education of Acadian youth to ensure the training of a well-educated class of leaders. Many dedicated individuals supported the Society's work throughout the years. Voice of the island's Acadian and Francophone community. Since 1970, it has fostered an impressive resurgence of the French language and culture by supporting the establishment of many socio-cultural, educational, and economic organizations.